Your son, he's gone. He was weak and foolish, like his father. So I destroyed him.
I'm Rick Dalton. It's my pleasure, Mr. Schwartz.
Call me Marvin. Put it there. That your son?
No, it's my stunt double, Cliff Booth.
Last night, we watched a Rick Dalton double feature. All the shooting. I love that stuff, you know, the killing.
A lot of killing.
Anybody order fried sauerkraut? Fan, you Nazi bastards!
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 8th episode of the Weak and Foolish Movie Podcast. My name is Mike Tang, and with me is
Joe Bang.
And today we will be reviewing the 9th film by auteur filmmaker Quentin Tarantino, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. This is a film that's set in 1969, and it revolves around the events, both fictional and non-fictional, leading up to the night of the Manson murder of actress Sharon Tate and her friends. It boasts an all-star cast of Leonardo DiCaprio, Brad Pitt, Margot Robbie, Al Pacino, and Timothy Olyphant. So our standard format for each episode is a non-spoiler discussion first, which will then be followed by a spoiler section. And we will always tell you which section we are in. And if you're watching this on YouTube or listening to this on YouTube, the video has a label that says spoiler discussion on it. And this is also going to be the first episode that we are going to try hosting on SoundCloud in addition to YouTube to make it more easily accessible for whoever wants to listen. Okay, so if you're listening to this on YouTube, we also have made it available on SoundCloud. Okay, Woo-hoo. So without further ado, let's begin our discussion on Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Joe, why don't you give us your non-spoiler thoughts on the film?
Yeah, so my first thought, and I guess this isn't that compelling, but I went in without any background information on the story that this movie was based off of. So, that being said, I would advise, if you haven't gone out and seen this yet, to get a little background on the Tate murders or the Charles Manson story. And that helps you to kind of ground yourself in what's going on. But that being said, it didn't impede anything having to do with the movie. I really enjoyed it. It feels like really almost a love letter in some ways to the Los Angeles area during those times in the late 60s, early 70s. But I think there were a lot of Easter eggs that were kind of dotted across the film that were referencing the actual events that I just kind of missed, but kind of knew they were referencing. So I would think it would enrich the experience of watching the movie, but isn't super necessary, but would be very helpful to you. I love this movie. I thought it was really well done. Tarantino, is a master of his craft, as I think you'll agree with, Mike. And I thought this film had a lot of his fingerprints all over it. I really like how it looks. He shoots on film, and it's so appropriate for this era. There's grain, there's pleasing color gamuts, there's all of that. And LA just feels so 60s and so stylish, but appropriately grimy. So overall, it's hard to discuss this film besides kind of the aesthetics of it without jumping right into the story and the spoilers. So I'll hold off for now. But I genuinely liked this movie a lot. I thought Leonardo DiCaprio's performance was excellent. I thought Brad Pitt's performance was excellent. I thought everyone really was at the top of their game for this film.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so my thoughts on the film. Tarantino is one of my all-time favorite directors. I actually saw Pulp Fiction when I was in 8th grade, and I was absolutely blown away by it. I've never seen a movie so bonkers, but something that worked so well. In general, just a through line through all his movies, I just love the unconventional structure of his films. He never tells something exactly in chronological order. He kind of presents an event and another scene and then another scene, and then it's just gradually these collection of scenes just build up. Sometimes they don't necessarily tie in with each other. I really enjoyed that aspect of his films, and while his movies do have action scenes, actually I think the true action set pieces in his films are actually the dialogue that he's written. He's a master of monologues, and he's created some really amazing characters and original characters that just give these awesome lines that we've come to know him for. He's also an expert at blending different genres together and different styles of filmmaking together. In Kill Bill, he mixed in anime with like classical kung fu action films with Japanese samurai films. He throws these genres in a blender and then puts it together, and somehow manages to make it very palatable for his audiences. Inglourious Bastards. So I mentioned Pulp Fiction. Inglourious Bastards, that was one of the best films of the last decade, 2000, 2009. It has one of, I think, the greatest and most suspenseful opening scenes of all time. And it's just two people sitting across from each other talking. And I remember showing that movie to you for the first time a couple years ago. And I remember immediately after you went and bought the Blu-ray, because that's how awesome that film was.
Before we finished the film, even for that opening sequence alone.
You bought the movie before the opening, or like before the movie ended?
Well, I bought it while we were watching it. Yeah.
Wow. I think that's just a testament to like what a masterpiece that film was, right? Like before it even ended, you already purchased the film. You knew that it was that good. So I say all that because I didn't actually enjoy his last two movies, Django Unchained and The Hateful Eight. I don't think either movie captured my interest, and maybe it's because they're Western films, and I know he's a big Western fan, but I'm actually not the biggest fan of Westerns. Maybe I need to revisit both films again. I've only seen both of them once when it was released in theaters. I haven't revisited it since. But with all that said, I think Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is actually his best film since Inglourious Basterds, since 2009.
Whoa, that's big.
I mean, I'm not saying it's better than Inglourious Basterds. I just think it's the best movie since then. It's definitely better than Django and Hateful Eight, in my opinion. And I'm going to say something very controversial here. You touched upon this performance in the movie, but I actually think Leonardo DiCaprio turns in the best performance of his career.
Whoa.
Yeah, I remember, leaving the theater, and we were talking about the movie afterwards in our group of friends, and I said that, and everyone was really surprised. But I'm gonna stand by this opinion of mine.
This is the hill you're gonna die on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because Leo usually plays characters who are angry or they yell a lot. Examples: Wolf of Wall Street, Inception, The Revenant. Right? He's a great actor, but he pretty much plays characters that display two emotions. He's either super serious or he's very angry. And so here
or getting mauled by a bear.
Yeah, or he gets mauled by a bear and he's screaming. Right? He's screaming and yelling, either words or just like in agony. But in this film, his character actually lacks confidence in himself. He stutters. He's falling apart. He has a southern accent. He's at the end of his ropes as an actor. He desperately needs a hit. None of these are spoilers because they're kind of shown in the trailer and kind of revealed in the official synopsis of the movie. So I feel like there's more layers to this performance than his previous roles that I've seen him in. I mean, he's great in What's Eating Gilbert Grape. What's Eating Gilbert Grape? Is that the title? Grape or Grapes? Anyways.
I think Grape, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he was great in that film. That's definitely like a performance that really stands out, I think, in his filmography. But aside from that, I think he's generally played characters who display the similar emotions. So I loved his performance in this movie. It was a blast just seeing him go to places that we haven't seen him go before, I feel like.
So do you think this is like his most complete or like his most diverse performance, and that's kind of why you feel that way? Or so do you think he performed better here than, say, Inception or Wolf of Wall Street?
Yeah, I think it's just maybe his character was the most fascinating and required more layers to him than his other characters have required, I guess.
That's totally fair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brad Pitt, I agree with you. He was great. I think he's had more memorable performances than this. Like for most of this movie, he just has that cool guy expression on his face. He's just, hands to his sides, like really chill with his sunglasses on. Margot Robbie, she actually, her role isn't as big of a role as I thought she would have.
True.
Like she is in this movie, but she doesn't have a lot of lines. But she does the best that she can to present a gentle, kind, and almost naive Sharon Tate. So yeah, she was nice in the movie. She was delightful, although I think we could have seen a little bit more of her. This movie is kind of a slow burn, and it builds up to a very suspenseful and I think somewhat satisfying finale. But yeah, for the most part, I think I definitely enjoyed this film. I would. I guess we could talk more about like where we put this in his filmography, in his rankings list later.
Sure. Yeah.
Are there any other thoughts that you wanted to talk about before we move on to spoilers?
Yeah, I would just emphasize what you said about Margot Robbie's performance. The reason I didn't really bring her up in my impressions is that she is very much a non-factor, I feel, in this film. Besides, again, it goes back to us needing to kind of know what happened in this story. Because, to me, not knowing anything about the murders, I was like, what is her role? She's just kind of dancing around a lot and smiling a lot and being really sweet and charming. But that's about it, and for most of the movie, that's kind of all she is. In fact, we can talk more in spoilers, but that's how little of an impression she seems to make, and it was a little confusing. This movie was definitely more about Leonardo DiCaprio's character and Brad Pitt's character. I love that we haven't named their actual character names. We've just called them Leo and Brad Pitt.
I think for the sake of this discussion, we'll just refer to the actors' names.
Yeah, okay.
Cliff
That's
Booth,
fine.
right? That's Brad Pitt's name.
Cliff Booth,
And
yep.
then,
He's a stunt man.
what was Leo's character's name again?
And Rick
Dalton.
Rick
That's
Dalton.
right.
That's right. We are so prepared. I'm just kidding.
Dude, Leo and Brad is fine. We know who they are.
Yeah, this is what you get when you cast A-list actors.
Yeah,
you
global superstars.
know? Yeah.
Okay, so do you think we can move on to spoilers then?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so spoilers starting now. All right, so in this section, we're going to first discuss the structure of the movie, because it actually kind of does deviate from Tarantino's prior films. It's his most straightforward film, in my opinion. Things pretty much move from point A to point B to point C, and it isn't divided into chapters like all of his previous films. So I think it works in his favor, but also to its detriment. What are your thoughts on, I guess, the structure of the film and I guess the movie overall? Any notes on that?
Yeah, I kind of was looking for the twisty, turny timeline that fits into Tarantino's MO, and I was pleasantly surprised that it wasn't there for this film. And I think it's out of necessity because they are trying to address iconic historical moments. This narrative doesn't really work when you kind of bring different timings and stuff together. However, they do cut back and forth between the characters and what they're doing throughout their days. Am I correct in thinking this film takes place over the course of 2 or 3 days?
In the beginning, yes.
That's right. There was a month jump.
Right. The third act.
Yeah.
The third act jumps ahead 6 months, actually.
That's right. So they pulled a Marvel and went 6 months later.
Yes.
I'm just kidding. I thought it was refreshing. I was kind of that's one of the things about Tarantino that I like, but I also have to brace myself for. In that, and it's kind of the same with Nolan films sometimes. In that, okay, well the timing is this. I gotta work on. I gotta do some mental gymnastics to, like, make sense of it all. But it really didn't have that, and it was really very much focused on the story, and I really appreciated that. And he does, however, take moments to subvert our expectations later on in the film too. I feel like it was, yeah. So
Yeah, I think I actually like the fact that his movies aren't always presented in chronological order, because it makes us work more to determine what's going on and kind of piecing together everything. I like that too about Christopher Nolan's movies. I mean, nearly every movie that we see these days, or just in general, they go from point A to point B to point C.
Right.
So I think it's refreshing when we are presented a story that we have to work a little bit more as an audience to kind of figure it out.
Right.
I think it just shows how, like, what masters these guys are at the craft of filmmaking.
True.
You know, they're able to jumble things up, but then still make it like a cohesive experience, and they're still able to deliver, like, impart feelings onto the audience. So I think because it moves from A to B to C, everything kind of hinges upon the ending. Like I said before, it was like a slow.
That's right.
It's like a slow burn. So we're kind of waiting. We know it's going to culminate in the Manson murder, or at least I did, because I knew what this was about. I had read into it. I actually read about the Manson murders before, a couple of months before, when the second trailer was released. So I was just waiting to see how the events would lead to that. So I mean, we'll talk more about the ending later. But
Sure.
I thought that was kind of interesting how he kind of subverted our expectations by giving us just a straightforward movie. I want to talk about how. Oh, sorry. Did you want to say something?
Oh, I was just gonna say there was a moment about an hour and 15 minutes into the film where I leaned over to Angela and said, "It still feels like they're setting everything up." That's how slow a burn this movie is, and I think we have to go into it with patience, and because it does feel meandering. It does feel like, at first, what is going on? You know, it just feels kind of like a day in the life type of film. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
kind of like
sure.
Yee or some
Like a
other film of that.
It's like a hangout movie.
Yeah, it does feel like that for a good portion of the film, but it does get there. It does reward all of that setup, and I think we'll talk about this more, but I do feel like it ends with classic Tarantino moments.
Yeah, definitely. I can't wait to talk about the ending, but I think just a couple of things to discuss about the film. It's also kind of a movie within a movie, right? It's like I felt like it was like Tarantino still wanted to make another Western, but he also wanted to make a film set in Hollywood in the 1960s. So he just combined the two concepts. And you know, if you've seen the movie, it's about like actors, and they're making a movie. They're making a Western. So there are actually long scenes of them making a film, which actually plays out like an actual scene from a Western. It's kind of hard to describe, but you know, you're watching a scene from a Western film. The actors are performing the scene, and sometimes you forget that you're watching Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. You're watching another film, and then all of a sudden, the actors will stop and like ask for a line, and then the director will will feed them some lines.
Yes.
So,
which is really funny, that moment you see Leo and Timothy Olyphant in a Western film, and it's so engaging, so fun, it sucks you in, and then suddenly Leo's character says, line, what's the line, and just kind of stutters and freaks out a little bit, and it just adds such a comedic moment to what feels like a movie within itself, and I thought that was a brilliant scene, and I feel like it's a scene I'll want to revisit over and over again.
Yeah, that I don't think I've seen
Yeah.
it done that way, but usually like they yell cut and then you see all the crew members and the directors like rush in. But this is the first time we're seeing like actual cuts, cuts in the scene, and it's like unfolding as if it's an actual film.
Yeah. I feel like this movie was a tribute to Hollywood in a way. It was a tribute to actors and the lives they lead, from stardom to feeling washed up and being presented an opportunity to have a second act to their careers, and some of them rising to the occasion and others not. And I feel like in Rick Dalton's story, Leonardo DiCaprio's character's story, we see that. We see the tribute to an actor's life, and actually his reaction to being washed up plays a major part in the role, doesn't it?
Yeah.
In the plot, a major part of the plot.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes those Western scenes so compelling. It's because we know that this guy, this is his chance to kind of break back in, right? And when he keeps messing
right.
up, it's so interesting because it's like we're watching two different movies. We're watching that Western film, but then we're watching this guy trying to struggle through the scene, and he's trying to like dig deep inside of himself. And I think one of the most memorable scenes in the movie was when he gives that performance of a lifetime, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the little girl goes up to him and is like, "That's the best acting I've ever seen in my life." And so
And he starts crying.
yeah, it's like the
Starts tearing up.
Yeah, right. It was like the climax of the Western film, but it's also the climax of this character who's playing this Western
That's right.
character. Yeah, so yeah, really interesting the way he set up those scenes. One more thing, I feel like Tarantino has a real fetish for the 1960s, and he keeps showing us movie posters and images from that area. It's like interspersed throughout the movie, and I understand it's to put his audience in that time and space, but after a while, okay, I think we got the point. Like, it's fine.
Yeah.
I think some of that could have been cut out. But
I think he was working really hard to immerse us into that era. I mean, even down to the radio constantly playing. I feel like we were listening to the radio for half the runtime of the movie. And all the TV ads, the TV shows that they would watch.
Right.
It all put us in there. But I feel like you're right. At some point, you're like, was it really this? Were the 60s this 60s?
Yeah.
Just like, were the 80s this 80s when we watch something like Stranger Things? Do you feel like it was distracting for you?
Yeah, because after a while, I just realized, it kind of it took me out of the movie. It made me realize I'm watching a movie made by a guy who loves the 60s, and he wants us.
Yeah.
He's just showing us stuff that he loves about the 60s, but I think he should, I don't know anything about the 60s, so I had no context for anything. I'm kind of like you, I kind of went into this movie not fully understanding the era that it takes place in. And, while he does show us these images to kind of give us some visual context, I don't think there's no emotional connection to this stuff,
Yeah.
It's like if I were to make a movie about like video games and then I would just show you like scenes from Mortal Kombat or like Street Fighter. Like someone who hasn't played video games their whole life, that doesn't mean anything to them. It was like me watching the Pokemon movie. So.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's a whole other discussion.
All right. Anything else you want to talk about in terms of like how the movie's structured and how things played out?
No, I think we covered it. But I'm just raring to talk about the end.
All right, let's get to the ending. Tell us.
Yeah.
Walk us through the ending. What you thought.
Well, we find out. So I had no idea there would be a twist to this movie. Again, I went in mostly blind, except for like seeing the trailers over and over again, which did a great job of not really telling us what's going on. We find out that this is an Inglourious Bastard style, like what if scenario film, like what if the murders didn't happen? What if and in classic Tarantino fashion, we find out in a blaze of guns and blood and guts that Sharon Tate and her friends were not going to get murdered in this film. They were not going to get murdered. And I love that.
Yeah.
So we should walk through the sequence maybe, and then we can talk through it.
Right. So everything plays out exactly, I think, as close to the historical events as I think it did. Up until
down to like they were giving us all these timestamps, like she is here now at this location at this time, like prepping us for like the inevitable. Oh no, she's gonna be home when this happens, and then
Leonardo DiCaprio stops them from entering Sharon Tate's property because he's drunk. He's so drunk that he goes out there and yells at them because their car is so loud.
Yes. They're in the driveway getting ready, plotting what to do to murder a bunch of people on the street, and then Rick Dalton comes out completely wasted and just tells them off, forces them to drive down the road, and delays it enough so that his friend Cliff Booth, Brad Pitt, could come back into the picture.
Yeah, and instead of breaking into Sharon Tate's property, they go for these two fictional characters that Tarantino's created.
The next door neighbors of the Tates.
Right.
Yeah.
Literally the guardians of the neighborhood, apparently.
Yeah.
You know, the whole sorry, go on.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
I mean, the sequence is very tense at first, right? They enter into Rick Dalton's house, and we think it's what happened to Sharon Tate is now going to happen to these two fictional characters, but instead, you know, Brad Pitt's dog is like super hungry, and then he goes and bites one of the hippies' penises. And the whole thing just erupts into a comedy. Like they just start brutally murdering the hippies, and then Leo DiCaprio's like in the pool. He gets his flamethrower out that he's a prop that he kept from a previous movie that he was in.
That's right.
Yeah, it's just like so over the top. It's like it's funny, and you know, it very much feels like Inglourious Bastards, where we saw the murder of Hitler and the Nazis, Django Unchained, where the black slave rose up and then, you know, fought against the white masters. Like, he gives us the satisfaction of seeing, you know, the tables turn on history and things unfolding differently. So, you know, it's a very fun scene, and but you know, it did make me wonder if that's really all that it was, like building up these two characters to save Sharon Tate. I know there's more to the background of the 1960s and particularly 1969 that I'm not all that familiar with, and you know, you're not familiar with either. Maybe that would help us understand the film more and what he's trying to say. But you know, just take it as is. What we're presented in the film is just it's about these two people who don't exist that he's just trying to make into heroes and to save Sharon Tate. And I'm wondering if it maybe represents something greater, like perhaps they saved the innocence of that time period. Because, you know, Sharon Tate's kind of portrayed as this naive and innocent person.
Yeah. And I mean, we don't know what the actual Sharon Tate was like, but I do get the sense they were trying to stay true to her personality and her spirit in real life. But is it so ubiquitously known what Sharon Tate was like that they kind of assumed that we would know in this film? I don't think they deserve that. I don't think they earned it. We didn't spend nearly enough time with Sharon Tate to make us feel this sense like, oh no, they're gonna get murdered. You know, I mean, they did their best. They showed how pregnant she was. They showed how much of a life of the party she was. How much she meant to her friends. But again, we spent so much of our runtime following Leonardo DiCaprio and Brad Pitt around. When Sharon Tate's the victim, you know, the victim who is about to suffer this horrible fate. And when it gets reversed, it feels really good, but it doesn't feel nearly as good as I feel like it could have been if we had really spent some time with her and felt this sense of loss that she was about to be murdered. Do you know what I'm saying?
Oh, I totally agree. Yeah, I think
It felt unearned, how, how meaningful the heroism of Brad Pitt and Leo was.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. If we had known Sharon Tate more in this film, right? Like we would have had an emotional attachment to her, and then when we see those hippies walking up to her place, like we know what it represents, and we know what kind of fate that she had. So I think we would be yearning for someone to step in and save them, and I think that would have made that ending even more impactful. I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
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 Um,
So I think that, yeah, it would have felt even better if they earned the moment. I think Tarantino was kind of coasting on, or counting on the audience to know the story, and I get it in that, people that are his age probably grew up knowing that, or the events were pretty recent, while they were growing up. But the audience is get younger these days. You and I, we didn't really know much besides maybe a quick Wikipedia search. So I think he needed to allow this film to stand on its own a little more, to really earn the stakes and earn that ending.
Definitely. Totally agree
Yeah.
with you, man.
Yeah. Structurally, I did feel like this film kind of was one of those fantasy fulfillment sort of things. It's kind of like, and I am not comparing the two, but it's kind of like what Rogue One was to Star Wars: A New Hope, in that here are these background characters that did this thing that led to this event. And I felt like this film was that too. It's like these are the two neighbors that saved their lives, and I kind of thought that was interesting. It was almost like, yeah, again, it's like, just as Rogue One was reliant on people to know the story, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was relying on us to know the real life events. And again, I just feel like it isn't. They need to. It's on them to kind of do some more of that legwork for us, I think.
Yeah.
And I don't want to sound entitled, like serve me, but I think as a film, as a complete film, it would have felt more complete if they had given us a little more time with Margot Robbie as Sharon Tate.
Yeah. I completely agree.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Bruce Lee.
Bruce Lee.
He's in this
So
film. What did you think about his portrayal?
I thought it was a really disrespectful portrayal of Bruce Lee. I thought they made him look really silly. They made him laughable. They made him a caricature, really, and I felt uneasy. I'm an Asian guy. We're Asians, and we're living in a cultural revolution for Asian Americans, in that we're being portrayed as actually normal, cool people on screen, instead of the caricatures of a kung fu fighter or whatever. And I thought, Bruce Lee is Bruce Lee. He's cool no matter what. But in this film, he is portrayed as a guy on a set, who Brad Pitt ends up fighting and beating up, and he's portrayed as really stuck up and really just uncool. The audience we were with was laughing at him, and I felt kind of embarrassed. It felt a little humiliating. Maybe because we look at Bruce Lee as a champion for for Chinese people or for Asian people. But I don't know. My thoughts have changed. But what since then they've softened a little bit. But I want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I don't know too much about Bruce Lee, but the way that it was portrayed on screen, I actually assumed maybe this is probably what he was like super cocky and like a show off. Just knowing what NBA athletes are like, and people who are at the top of the game are not humble people. They're generally very arrogant and full of themselves. And
True.
I mean, you're the best, right? You're the absolute best and an all-time great, a legend. So I think it's very difficult for a person to be humble when you're that good at something, you know? And I think that's how I kind of interpreted that Bruce Lee scene. I thought Mike
Yeah.
Moe's portrayal of Bruce Lee was like spot on. His accent, the way he talks.
That's right.
My only
The glasses.
right, exactly,
The hair.
right, and the outfit. Like my only complaint actually about that scene wasn't so much like the portrayal. Like I totally get what you're saying, like how disrespectful it comes off. I just made some assumptions about Bruce Lee, so that maybe that made it a little bit more acceptable to me. But my one complaint is the fact that he took off his sunglasses, because he was
Yes.
he was like the splitting image of Bruce Lee. But the moment he took off his sunglasses, I'm like, this guy's not Bruce Lee anymore.
Yeah. Down to the jawline, he was perfect. Like it looked like Bruce Lee come back to life until the sunglasses got removed.
Yeah, and then he just looked like some other random Asian guy.
Yeah. But I mean, like, what are you gonna do? You know, it's not his fault. But yeah, you're right. Maybe, and he wasn't in this film enough to warrant like revealing his whole face. No offense to Mike Moe. I hope he never listens to this, but but you know, he's in there for 2 minutes and just keep the sunglasses on. It really takes us out of the movie to see that it's not him, especially after they did such a good job of making him look right.
Yeah. I'm glad. I'm so happy for Mike Moe, because I saw this video online of him like working out and training. This is way before he was casted. He did this like several years ago, I think, but it was basically a montage of like Bruce Lee quotes, and so he's like obviously like a Bruce Lee fan.
Yeah.
And so to be cast as his own hero and to give that kind of performance, I think that's awesome. So really really happy for him.
So this is what changed my mind. I'm much more. So I still think it's disrespectful. They could have done it differently, but my mind has softened a lot on this. I sent you this tweet yesterday. It's from Mangiotto on Twitter. He's a big Bruce Lee fan, and he wrote, "Portraying Bruce as arrogant, he was. Didactic, yep. And hot-tempered, he was famously hot-tempered, is eminently respectful to the legacy of a man who has been elevated to golden calf status by Western idolaters. It made me cry. Lee is my hero because he was imperfect, but he fought." And I thought that was beautiful. You know, I thought, oh, you know, and maybe I don't understand Bruce Lee enough to realize that Quentin Tarantino was actually paying a beautiful tribute to the actual man and not the cultural icon that he is known as. You know, he wasn't in real life. He wasn't the man who beat up Chuck Norris. You know, maybe in real life he really was like this, and maybe this is the best tribute he could have paid. So I get it, but it still felt a little mocking. It still felt a little like, ha ha ha, this funny Chinese man making kung fu sounds, which he did. I understand. He did the whoa thing all the time in his movies, and it still is really silly. But yeah, I don't know. It's a feeling I can't really shake.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah.
All right, let's talk about finally how this movie stacks up against Tarantino's other films.
Yeah, I'm gonna defer to you on this. I think you know Tarantino's catalog a lot more than me. I didn't see Django. I didn't see Hateful Eight. But I did. I have seen both Kill Bills. I have seen Pulp Fiction and Inglourious Basterds. Inglourious Basterds is my favorite Tarantino film by far. This is right up there. I think it's kind of in between Inglourious and Kill Bill, or actually Inglourious and Pulp Fiction, and then the Kill Bills. But I'm not too sure yet. But I'll let you take the wheel to land this plane.
Yeah, for sure. I thought it was a great movie. I thought it was a pretty good Tarantino movie. So
Okay.
It doesn't have. I don't think it has actually a moment that stands out with Tarantino's trademarks. And when I say trademarks, I'm talking about like rich dialogue, very very tense moments, an epic finale. It does have some of these things, but not to the degree that I think he's capable of, that we've seen him do before. I think the only scene that really stands out to me in the movie, aside from the ending, is when DiCaprio gives his best, quote unquote, best performance during the film shoot. I think Brad Pitt visiting the Manson Ranch was pretty good, but it didn't come anywhere near with what we've seen Tarantino do before. So
That is so true.
So I think my Tarantino ranking would be number 1, Pulp Fiction, number 2, Inglourious Bastards, number 3, Kill Bill, and I'm combining Kill Bill Volume 1 and 2. He has said it's just one movie, so Kill Bill. And then I place this Once Upon a Time in Hollywood at number 4 on his list.
That's pretty solid.
Yeah, it was a solid movie. It's just I think when you stack it up against some of his other films, it's just it's not quite as strong. And I think the key to that was actually the Sharon Tate character, like you said. I totally agree with you. And I think actually when you were describing what could have been in this film, I actually felt like I was feeling like, oh, man, I think that might have been it. That was the missing thing.
Yeah. There was a lack of stakes almost to what was going on.
Yeah, just, dude, cut out half of those 60s montages and just give us some more Sharon Tate, and I think it's a stronger film.
Yeah. Less camera on the back of the car driving around shots, maybe. Less picking up hippies on the streets. Less of all of that, I think, would have been helpful. I feel like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, for a film that is about Hollywood, is lacking a lot of the crackle and the energy and the spark that Tarantino has had in his films in the past. I feel like it was a little more of a pedestrian movie than usual, and it shows. Hopefully this isn't a trend of his, because we really love Tarantino, but yeah, but it's still a good, all of that said, still a good movie. Yeah, I kind of basically agree with your ranking, except I would put Inglourious Bastards as number 1, and then Pulp, and then Kill Bill, and then Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yeah, there's no arguing against Inglourious Bastards. If you put it at number 1, like, dude,
Yeah.
it's totally legit.
Yeah.
All right. Are there any other closing thoughts that you want to get out before we end?
No, I think that's it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the Weekend Foolish Movie Podcast. We'll see you next time. We definitely have some more movies that we'd like to get through. I think one movie we've talked about that we really want to discuss here is The Farewell, the film by Lulu Wang starring Awkwafina. So hopefully next time we can discuss that one.
Yep. Thanks for sticking with us all.